Hi, I'm John Atack, and I'm very glad to welcome Monia.
Hi.
And we're going to talk about something that I'd never heard about until a couple of weeks ago when my friend and colleague Yuval Laor said that he'd been talking with you, and you'd contacted him because he is the world's leading expert on belief, awe, and fervor. And he's put forward a model that doesn't just apply to the extremes of society, it applies to everyone. Mm-hmm. We're all, to some extent, we can feel wonder, awe, terror. These are the aspects of that. And we can all feel fervent about things, passionate about things. Mm-hmm. But you brought along something that was quite new to me. So, and this, I believe the correct term is stan.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
Perhaps you might tell us what a stan is. I'm going to take my glasses off, actually, because I can't stand this anymore.
Yeah, stan, there's a bit of a disagreement about the origin of it, whether it's originally from stalker plus fan, stan, or whether it's a reference to the Eminem song Stan, if you're familiar with that one.
Yes, a remarkable piece of work, actually, I think.
And it's interesting that song is about a fan named Stan who is obsessed with him and, is writing him letters and is like, why aren't you answering me? And eventually, I think, dies in a car crash in the music video or something like that.
I think he puts his pregnant girlfriend into the trunk of the car and drives into a lake in fairly typical Eminem fashion.
Yeah, it's very uplifting. And fans decided, I want to be a stan, for some reason. It's a bit of an interesting development to me, where it's like it was seen as, an extreme behavior, but now you'll just see people say like, yeah, I stan this or standing this and that. So I think it's become a bit more commonplace. So it's basically a fan, but someone that's more extreme and just really, has like this strong attachment to what they call a fan object in the academic writing of fandom. So like, a show or a band or random celebrity, or even like, it could just be a video game as well, because they have fandoms, or sports. Like there's just so many different levels of fandoms. So
it's true, actually, with sports. I have a friend who is a football supporter, and he took me to see Nottingham Forest, our local football team, and I was astonished at the exuberance. When a goal was scored, he'd jump up and down, a grown man, and embrace everybody around him. And yet it's quite normal behavior. We get excited about things. How old were you when you first started along this path?
Well, fandom itself, I was, 11 maybe, 10 or 11, very young. And I discovered fandom completely on my own. I feel like so many of us will just end up in fandom and don't even know what it is. And then we're like, oh, so the timing for me was great because, the internet was just coming along, and there was like front page on our the computer that we had that you can make like a website from. And I was completely obsessed with a TV show, and I was just like, oh, there's websites. I can make a website for the show. So I started just like, so I created a website in front page. It never made it online because I didn't know how to get it online, but I had all the design stuff, and I was like, yeah. And then a couple of years later, there was another TV show that I really liked. And then at that point, I had realized how to get things online. So I created a fan site for that one on GeoCities. And then, so this is the thing too, is that fandom, a lot of people I've seen a lot of discussions lately about fandom being super toxic. And I'm just like, fandom itself is not toxic, I don't think, because it's just a community of people who come together and share, what they like about something, and then just have creative, writing or art or just discussions in general about it. So I just like changed fandoms every now and then, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a big one. I think that was really big online with all of the shows. And GeoCities was a free website but you got all those ugly ads and everything, and you're like, oh, I don't want my fan site to look like this, it's so ugly. And then you would find people who had paid for web space, other fans, and they would offer you free space. They say, like, do you want to be hosted? And you can just do whatever you want, and you'll have like 2 gigabytes of space online. So there's a lot of that. I mean, it's just like, it's not really something that I necessarily encounter otherwise. Like, you wouldn't find someone who has a website and is like, do you just want some space on my server that I'm paying for? Because you don't have to pay anything. They're just giving it to you because they're like, yeah, I want to host a website. Why not? Fan site. So I ended up at one point having like 10 different sites of just like various things, like graphics, just like, yeah, you would find, somehow you found other people that also had sites, and you would just like form a community. And then it shifted for me onto LiveJournal, and then now my primary base for fandom is Tumblr. A lot of other people are on Twitter, or TikTok is also big, and Instagram. And I feel like when it jumped from LiveJournal to the public social media, which is Twitter and Tumblr, it became, that's when it really started spiraling out of control, I think.
I mean, if I pick up the point on just the notion of fandom, my dentist, who's a dear friend, is deeply involved in the works of Charles Dickens. He's read all of Charles Dickens' books. He's reread them all. He particularly likes, I think it's Little Dorrit and A Tale of Two Cities. And so, of course, if he meets somebody who shares, that passion, and I've only read one Dickens novel, I read Great Expectations, which I thought was fantastic, actually. I thought it was really well written, but I haven't had time to read any more. But it's just something that you feel passion about. And when you meet like-minded people, of course you associate with them and share things. And in the age of the internet, it seems to me perfectly natural that somebody they've bought space for a website and they've got far more space than they can use. It's like, Yuval shares his Netflix account with me because he had to buy 5 accounts. So it seems quite normal. There doesn't seem, and the idea of any toxicity being involved in that, it seems to me a silly idea. It could, however, become toxic. You could start stalking Charles Dickens, or something like that.
I think that would be pretty hard right now, unless you're
well, you'd be hanging around the graveyard a lot.
Yeah, you could be like, unless you're like a ghost whisperer and you're just like, I know he's somewhere, and just like following. That could be an interesting series, actually. I'll save that. I'll save that for a pitch later. But it's true. It's just, there were obviously people who were doing weird things. I was on LiveJournal when there was someone who, she went by Limey Bean and she faked dying, and that was the first time I encountered it. But it's a pretty common thing. Like, people will do like fake deaths. So she supposedly had some sort of chronic illness, and then like at some point it was like someone logged in and was like, I'm so sorry to share the information that blah 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 has now passed away. And then like the group of friends was very suspicious, and it took less than a week before they were like, it's all bullshit, it's all fake. And then she had to come back and be like, I'm so sorry, I just like, things spiraled out of control and I didn't know what to do. So I was like, I'm just going to kill myself off now. Like, oh dear. But I wasn't involved in that fandom. So it was just like watching the drama from afar and just being like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that can happen. And now every time I see things like that from afar in fandoms, when it's someone who like just some insane story, I'm always just like, it could be true. Could also not be true. It's hard to know. But I think LiveJournal and those other accounts, because even like in the 70s and stuff like that, I believe what was being used was like IRC channels. Is that what they were called? Like, there was that primitive internet, and like there were fans on there already working with Star Trek, I think, was one of the big ones.
Yeah.
From when there was like, obviously fandom has existed since way before that. But
I mean, you stimulate a thought there, which is I knew a psychiatrist who actually had every Star Trek on VHS tape, from when they first became available.
Yeah.
And so, fans come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing, because I've been reading a lot of academic writing on fandom, because I'm just like trying. I mean, it really clicked when I was listening to Yuval, but I've also been reading a lot of stuff because I'm trying to see like what they're saying. And they will point out that there is an assumption that fans are a certain way. And it's like, that's not really how it is, and how the concept of fandom in itself needs a community. If you're just one person who's a fan of something, you're not a fandom on your own. You could be writing, you could be painting, and it's stimulating for yourself, but you're not part of a fandom. It's only once you start building a community that it becomes a fandom.
And there as well, that the great hero of our age is Charles Darwin, who's to such an extent that in fact Wallace's work has been pushed aside, and what used to be called the Darwin-Wallace idea of natural selection, we now just talk about Darwin. And there's this notion that history somehow began with Darwin, but Darwin was a fan. He was a fan of Alexander von Humboldt, who there are more places, animals and plants named after Humboldt than any other individual. That's real fandom, because he was the guy who broke through into looking at natural history, seeing how the environment was being degraded at the end of the 18th century. When Darwin went on the Beagle, the books he took with him were Humboldt's books, which he carefully annotated. So even Darwin was part of a fandom.
Yeah, there's so much. There's the listomania, of course. I remember one of the books I was reading was talking about a specific girl who was American, and they were saying after the American Civil War, she traveled to Europe, and they had this whole story, because I guess her diaries survived. So it was about how she went to the List House and then went to and just like was going to concerts all the time. And I was like, this is so funny. This is the same, but from 300 years ago.
Beatlemania, but Franz Liszt was at the center of it. And of course, he would be a very significant figure because his daughter married Wagner, and Wagner took most of his ideas. So he had a tremendous influence on music. But yeah, there have been a number of, if you go back to the castrati in the 18th century, they had incredible wealth generated from having fans fainting all around them. So it's a very very normal, is that the right word to use? It's a very natural, it's very usual. It's something that's happened a great deal in history, but it's been amplified and accelerated by before the printing press. Maybe the Hittites would have little clay tablets, and they'd put things in them and pass them around. But you get to the printing press, then you get on to photogravure at the end of the 19th century, where you can suddenly print photographs on ordinary paper. Yeah. And then along comes the radio, TV, movies, and now the internet, which goes everywhere. That half the people in the world, at least, something like 3.5 billion people, are connected to this thing. Yeah. And it can make awful things happen, like the murders of Muslims in India through false stories about their ritual killing of cows, holy cows, and things like that. It's a terrible gossip medium, but it's also a way for people who fetishists of all kinds, and to have their little clubs, and which I think is generally not a bad idea, except when it does become a bad idea, when you get a group of erotomaniacs pursuing the same love object, or 17 people fighting over which one of them can marry the Eiffel Tower. That can be a bit bad, I should think. But
I would assume there's more than I feel like I've only heard about the one person who was married to the Eiffel Tower, and I think they broke.
That's because she killed the other 16, don't you?
Did she really? I mean, that wouldn't be a surprise to me. And I'd be like, yeah, there's definitely more people who probably feel that way. So the strongest survival of the most murderous, I guess.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that sounds scary. It's interesting, because looking back, it seems like industry Hollywood entertainment industry was already realizing the impact of fans back in the studio days, is what it looked like, because they would start receiving all these letters and they were like, oh, what's this? Oh, people are writing letters to our people. Oh, this is great. Let's start a department, fan department, answer letters. And then, so that's when they realized, oh, we can use them as, we can use the celebrities as our totems for whatever and steer people. And now.
And so when Valentino died, you had tens of thousands of people on the street to, you know, to see the passing of the Sheikh of Araby. Yeah.
So it's like I think now the industry is a bit behind. Like if you look at the music industry, when the MP3s came along, they were a bit, you know, they were like, oh, what's this? We don't know what this is. We'll figure it out, but we're not bothered about that. And then it's like, oh wait, all of our albums are leaking and people aren't buying things anymore. Shut it down. So they're a bit slow to catch on, but I think they've now started to catch on to how they can manipulate fandom, because I was doing some research and I was reading in, I want to say it was Vanity Fair or it was the Hollywood Reporter. It was one of those where it's someone who was essentially studying fandom for the purposes of business, and was talking about how we have to understand how fan communities are built, how they are splintered, and how we can use that. And then they were also discussing how fandom builds or fills a spiritual need for people, so they must take more advantage of that. And I'm like, really? So the business is going to take advantage of people's spiritual needs, but are you going to be responsible with that? I don't think you are. Like it seems, well, they don't have a lot of ethics when it comes to that stuff. So
a memo leaked from a meeting in the 1950s at what is now ExxonMobil, Esso, where one of their PR guys said, we have to move, and they're selling gasoline, you know, we have to move towards being seen as a religion, you know, and evoking fervor. So it's in the PR trade. And I mean, frankly, you know, Bernays had already seen this in the 1920s. And as he said, when he first saw Goebbels, oh, he's been reading my book, you know. So when people say, oh, the Nazis invented this, it's homegrown American stuff. There's the idea of getting people's sexual attention and then getting their spiritual attention, whatever that might be. I'm not really quite sure. It's a kind of vague area, but devotion, that's what they're looking for. And of course, all advertisers want that. They want brand loyalty.
Yes, they call it, the Lady Gaga book that I was reading calls it customer evangelism. They're looking for customer evangelists. And I'm like, you guys are just writing this without even any kind of, you're straight face. You don't even realize what you're saying, because they're just, you know, they're talking about how you need to get them to be extra committed so that they can, you know, convert others. And I'm like, yeah, this is okay. This is a marketing book. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's what we want on my channel. I want customer evangelism. That's a good idea.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. And that book also pointed out that, and I think that's probably accurate for fandom, where they discussed, I guess this is a common idea that it's like 80-20, where 20% of people do the amount of work and then 80% comes along or something like that. But in the Gaga book, the research that they did, they showed that it's actually 1% of the fans that are doing the majority of the work, and then 10% participate. And the 89% rest is just like kind of casual fans, the people that are just like kind of around. So they were saying like, it's interesting that it actually is only 1%. And so their goal, and according to the writer of this book, because it's not actually written by Gaga's people, but they're saying like, you have to start targeting the 1%. Like those are the people that you are targeting. Those are the people that you're dealing with. And then I'm like, okay, so you take the most dedicated group of people that has the most emotional attachment, and you start directly communicating with them about what you want. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's definitely going to, you know, lead to more of that. I
mean, in PR terms, the expression opinion leaders, has been used for decades, and it isn't an 80-20. It is a much smaller percentage of people who, for some reason, we listen to.
Yeah.
For some reason, they capture our attention, whether that is genuine charisma, which I do think exists. I think there are people. I mean, he's very much out of favor now, but a friend of mine years ago, he went and saw a play in the West End. In fact, it was The Iceman Cometh. And he said, this actor, when he walked on the stage, the whole theatre just went like this. And I said, and what was he called? He said, Kevin Spacey. And I think that there are some people who there is something that grabs our attention. Though more often it's something that's generated. You know, as Max Weber, the sociologist, said, that it's at the interface between you and the object of worship, where your own idealization is what you're seeing, your own projection is what you're seeing, rather than the person. And of course, as I say, Kevin Spacey is not in the least bit charismatic anymore, even though I think he was acquitted in the case against him. But you know,
I know he still has. I know his update accounts are still running, because I saw those, and they strongly believed in, you know, his comeback is coming. So, you know, the 1% fans is still there very strongly, which is like unsurprising, really, because this happens with all celebrities. As soon as if something happens that goes against the fan beliefs, they really find a way to say, like, well, then it's not real, or it means something else entirely.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's just like, and I remember having a conversation with someone, and it was just like, this person apparently is more sexist than I thought, because here's all these quotes, and they're just like, how could you possibly say that about them? I'm like, here are quite literally the things they said. It's like, but that's not that real person. Like, you have to understand that this is all part of the image. And like, I would like to understand that this is something that has been said out loud, and at this point, I don't care if it's part of an image, because it's part of the public consciousness and part of the intention, right?
Mel Gibson isn't anti-Semitic, you know. He just said things that were nasty about Jews.
But, you know,
and also, in fact, to have two employees who are Jewish who work very closely with him. But apparently, when he's had a bit of a drink, he's, you know, something else comes out. But yeah, that denial, that ability to say, that's not, you know, I know this person. I know
you are the problem because you are pointing it out. Yeah. And it was very, like, I think that's at the time where I was like, oh, because I hadn't experienced this level of dedication until that, where I was just like, oh, we're just ignoring reality. Okay, but why? And it was still my community too. So I guess I should probably explain that the reason that I found my way to all of these discussions and Yuval's stuff is because I was essentially, I called it exiled. I was exiled from a fandom or a standom because I had some opinions that weren't welcome, that I didn't realize were controversial at all. And it was like over 2 hours, I think. It's like I posted something and people were agreeing, and I got some messages, and then some people were not happy. But I'm like a nobody. I've never been someone who's like, I'm in fandom for my own fame, which there are definitely people like that. I've always just been like, I just want to do stuff. So it's not like I had a lot of followers or name recognition or anything, but someone who was a big name found this post and was like, this is the person we're going to go after. So she created a whole essay about, you know, how, you know, this is a person who is, you know, beyond rescue, you know, a sick fucko, this and that, perverts, this and that. Like, how could you possibly, if you ever talk to this person, if I ever see this username, like, I'm going to block all of you, like, everyone should block. And I was like, oh, but everyone knows she's crazy, right? So it's not really a problem. 2 hours later, I'm completely blocked from everything. My old friends will not talk to me. I would message people. I'm like, I'm confused as to how you believe this when you know me, and like, we've been friends for years. So like, I'm sorry, I can't deal with this kind of negativity. So like, I just can't. I'm sorry. Please don't just talk to me anymore. And I'm just like, what is happening?
And that's definitely something we associate with destructive cults. You know, for me, the marker, and I'm not all that keen on the word cult because it's, you know, been trashed so hard. But with the destructive cults, the marker is shunning.
Mm-hmm.
When people become, somebody gives you the idea that you should not talk with somebody. And that indeed is why I left Scientology back in 1983, because if I was told that a friend of mine had been declared suppressive, and I said, well, where's the evidence? And they were, no, you can't talk with them anymore. And it was the first time I'd been told that I couldn't talk with somebody. And I said, I'll talk with whoever I want to talk with. And it was a really strange realization that the majority of the people I knew, people I'd known for years, were quite willing to say, they can be very devious, these suppressives, you've got to watch them, and they're very dangerous, they're very toxic, you've got to keep away from them. And it is almost that the person they've been excommunicated, and it's been determined that they are now diabolic. They are actually invested with the devil, and if you have anything to do with them, the contagion will cross over to you.
Yes. And
that is just so stupid.
Don't read anything they have to say, because it's coming. Like, I started because it was a music fandom, and I got really into so now I just have an archive of things that have happened in the music industry where artists have been effed over. I mean, the way that they would phrase it too was block and stay safe. Like, don't. Oh yeah. So I was saying I got really into music industry. So I started being like, but I don't think what you're saying is right. So I would share like information, be like, I read this about contracts, and I read this about that, and these old managers say this. And I started listening to a podcast basically for music industry people, because it's like an agent and a promoter that were just talking, and they were interviewing other people in the industry. And I was like, oh, I feel like I'm like listening to some backstage talk here, because they were saying a lot of things, and I'm like, I don't think fans know this. Where they were just discussing, for example, I think it was the CEO of Ticketmaster, and he was saying, we don't really mind scalpers, because scalpers take up the price, right? And also the pricing is way too low. The pricing should be as high as what people pay on the secondary market. So they think if someone pays $1,000 for a scalped ticket, that ticket should have been $1,000 to begin with. There is absolutely no interest in like, can fans afford this? Like, it should be as high as it could possibly be. And I'm just like, oh, interesting. And then you hear all these managers who was like, yeah, we used to cooperate with scalpers. Like, there's hundreds of tickets that just go directly to scalping, because and I'm just like, oh, I don't think people know about this. You guys are just saying it out loud. Okay. But no one listened to me, because, if you read anything that I had to say, then it's like, oh my God, you're unsafe. And this is a conspiracy theory. And it's a conspiracy theory that labels sometimes shelve their artists. It's a conspiracy theory that payola is a thing and shawola is a thing. These are all conspiracies. Those aren't real things. Paparazzi gets called most of the time, also conspiracy. Like, everything is a conspiracy, which is like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had my own experience for a year. A guy called Mark Dean, who was the guy who signed George Michael, signed Wham originally, and was named in the case against Simon. He was with Atlantic Records. He was on the board of East West, which was Atlantic in the UK, 5-star, ABC, Billy Ray Harper, I think. But and it just so happened he got involved with Scientology and gave them £60,000 and then decided he wanted it back. And I really had withdrawn from all of that, and I got a call from a lawyer asking if I would help him, and I became intrigued. So for a year, whenever I was going through London, I'd go and stay with him and talk. And it meant I went into their offices and I saw the way that the business was running. Kevin Spacey again, there's a wonderful film called Swimming with Sharks, which was he made after Usual Suspects, and it's about Hollywood, and he's in the production part, and it's about just how dreadfully the assistants are treated. It's about the relationship between an assistant and producer. And I took Mark Dean to see this film. I'd seen it before, and it was showing in the cinema still, so I took him to see it, and he said that's exactly the way the business is. He'd come up with Pink Floyd's original manager, who'd made the mistake of going with Sid Barrett when he left Floyd, and that didn't end too well. But he said it was exactly the way he'd been bullied and abused. And I hope he sues me for this. It's exactly the way he bullied and abused his young assistant. And seeing what was, the public face, the smiling face of the industry, and the absolutely rapacious, sociopathic behavior behind the doors was just astonishing. To see and I've seen it now. I've seen it in the publishing trade. I've seen it in the art world, in the world of painting. That there is this facade, and then there's what's going on behind, and it's awful. And it shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't be that way. Which, for me, essentially, what I'm concerned with is authoritarianism in our society. And it's bullying and authoritarian, and I don't like that.
It's it's so scary. The George Michael case is so interesting as well, because I watched the documentary that they released fairly recently. I guess he was working on it when before he passed, because it has his voiceover. And when they were covering his court case, and they interviewed the label heads, and they were like, well, we were really worried because if he won, this is a standard contract that every single artist has. If he wins this case where he says that our contract is so evil, then we're going to be in trouble, because every artist is going to want out. And it's like, yes, maybe that should be something to think about. Why is every single one of your recording contracts this insane that someone as big as George Michael has to go to court and then doesn't even win? And I know Robbie Williams tried to go to court a month or two, not too long after George Michael had his court trial, where he also was trying to get out of his Take That contract. And that, I believe they ended up settling, but they ended up letting him leave eventually. But he also tried to get out. And I don't think they ever really win.
Many careers were blighted by the industry. The Kinks, for example, Ray Davies, one of the great stars of the 60s. There's a long period where the Kinks are basically in court, trying to get some money back. The Small Faces, who were one of the biggest selling bands, quite rightly, I think, of the 60s, Steve Marriott, remarkable, and Ronnie Lane, remarkable talents, and yet they made no money. Even Humble Pie, who I think actually outgrossed Led Zeppelin in the early 70s on the American tour circuit, there was no money for them. But the management were driving around in Rolls Royces and Bentleys and having a great time of it. And that there is something intrinsically wrong with the idea that, Bill Gates gets all the money and the people that did the work are still, they don't even have pensions often. There's an imbalance there that is despicable, that it's the people who sell the product make the money rather than the people who make the product. I'm beginning to sound like a Marxist. I'm not a Marxist.
I think the thing is, because I'm just reading, because like I said, I've just been reading a lot from their perspective, because I had my own idea and why would this happen? But then you just hear them saying out loud that they they really believe that what they're doing is actually perfectly fine. Why shouldn't I get this money? I did the work. You're just a product. I was reading a court decision from the 1800s, but the 1980s, about the band New Edition, because I'm working on a lot of history, and they had signed what I believe is called a production deal in the music industry, which is when a producer picks up an artist and then gets a label deal via them, so that they get money and then the artist gets money, but they are the primary earner. And this is a pretty common thing that people should avoid. What Absolutely. I've read. Yeah, they're production deals are no-nos. Don't get a production deal. So they tried to get out of their deal with him. And part of his argument was, well, because he wanted to keep the name. He was this was a black band, and he's like, listen, I want to keep the name. I'm just going to get new guys, white guys. They're going to do better in the charts. I make the music. Like, this is just like a play. This is a play that I've written, and they are just the actors. And the court was just like, not so sure about that. I don't think, no. They rejected that. But it's like, no, he really believed that. And then he went on to manage New Kids on the Block. So he did manage to get a white band to, climb the charts. And he was like, I've never gotten over that court loss with these other guys. And it's like, but you did nothing. You really, and he's like, I've learned my legal lesson. And it's like, oh, so you learned to write even like more restrictive contracts.
And it's happened so often. I mean, Phil Spector with Ronnie and Ronettes, that I was shocked. It was only a few years ago to find out that the records were actually recorded by different people. And the Ronettes went out. It's like, with the Monkees, at least you knew they were just singing in front of something. But with the Ronettes, they weren't even singing it.
Yeah.
And again, there was some. So you find these places where people who really should have been recompensed for doing something astonishing, as you say, they're just considered the puppets that Simon Cowell or whoever is manipulating. And so, why should they make any money? It's my idea.
It's truly, and even because Take That fascinates me a lot, because they've grown so much as people, because there was so much drama. I don't know how much you paid attention to the mainstream press, but I know
none at all.
So I know it was a big thing in the UK, at least, that they did a really big Robbie versus Gary, who was the lead singer of Take That, and the press pushed the rivalry between them in a way that was very aggressive, and in a way that Robbie was very like, he was vocally quite cruel, like quite cruel, and would make fun of Gary. Would be like, oh, he's a loser, like I have everything, like he can go to hell, like, incredibly vocally, like I hate him. And now, they performed together, they had a single together, they've just like, and they've had these discussions where they've realized, and whether it's just for show, it's possible, but I still appreciate that they have these now grown-up men who are like, you know what, I was completely out of line and my ego was out of control. And so even if it's just for show, it's like you still have the narrative of them talking against. I'm like, this is interesting. They got out of that spiral of hatred,
With the Beatles, when John Lennon famously put in a song about Paul McCartney, "Yesterday was all you wrote," which is somewhat of an oversimplification, I think.
Oh, dear.
And it, eventually, I think they did kiss and make up, but they were grown men by the time they fell out.
Yeah.
McCartney to this day says every day he thinks about John Lennon and is sad.
Yeah.
Which you would be, I guess.
Yeah.
But yes, these, Roger Waters sued for the name Pink Floyd and lost. Chris Squire sued for the name Yes and won. So you had Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford, and Howe touring for a while. And all of these, again, as you say, how much the industry manipulates these stories, and how much, and how much people can grow up and get over being so childish in their lives,
Yeah, it's and I hope to see that more. And there's a few other bands that I've loved that had big falling outs, and then suddenly they were like, oh, we're reunited, and now they're still touring, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So growth is possible, and that's also part of why I've been kind of heartened by watching Cult Exit and Recovery, because I'm like, you know what, you can change, you can grow, it's possible. Growth is possible. As I try to convince myself that it's possible. But yeah, there's a lot, and Take That is interesting with that as well, because you'll see the way that they've shaped it as if Robbie Williams was the Justin Timberlake all along, and it's like, but he wasn't. Gary was the Justin Timberlake, but because things happened, because he also was, just reading the history, there was a lot of behind the scenes pushing around and stuff like that as well. And he said like, oh, I felt completely useless. Because he developed an eating disorder. It was like a lot of stuff. But just the way that now the story is, oh, no, it was always Robbie that was supposed to be the star. And it's like, but that's not actually what happened. Why can't we accept that there are different ways that things play out without, there seems to be an insistence of like, we just want this story always. Which now reminds me of the film Bohemian Rhapsody and why I was so angry with it, because they changed so much of the story of Queen and invented animosity between them, invented a breakup, like they never broke up. Why are you inventing that they broke up and that Freddie Mercury had to come crawling back and literally be like, please let us play together again. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. Please let us play together. And it's like, but this didn't happen. They were planning on playing Live Aid always. Like what? They were just not touring. Oh, we're pretending like they broke up. Okay.
Let's make some drama out of it. I think he was voted the 58th, Freddie Mercury, the 58th greatest Briton ever, which, considering he was born in Africa, is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
and is of a Parsi background and grew up in Pakistan or India, and then came here as a baggage handler at an airport. But good for him, Also with Robbie Williams, speaking of the power of fandom, there was a poll in 1999 to determine who the most influential musician of the last 1,000 years was, and he won. Interesting. And it's like, so Beethoven didn't get a look in, let alone the guy who invented musical notation, who may have had a bit more influence on music than Robbie Williams, But
that's interesting. I wonder if they were thinking as well, because he received an infamously big deal in 2002, somewhere around there. I think it was millions and millions of pounds, and I think it was what's called a 360 deal, which is where, because they don't make money off of music anymore. Music is a loss leader, right? This is just the thing to get people in, but then you want them to buy everything else. And then, so I wonder if that was part of it, because if he had a 360 deal, there was probably a lot of other parts where he was used specifically to influence people. That's so interesting. It's
So in terms of your own fandom, you recognize that there was a certain fervor involved there, and evidently you've done, if I may say so, astonishing research into this area. You thought I was going to say something horrible then, didn't you?
No.
Where you said,
just do research. I don't know. Yeah.
And so you're looking to write a book about this, or do a PhD, or what are you going to do with it?
Well, I do want to, if I can make it book length, that would be great. But I don't know. The part of me is, and I told you this, I was like, oh yeah, if you want to talk, that's great. I'll do that, because I'm still very much like, I can't believe anyone would want to read about this. But I do want to write about my particular experience, because there's a lot of ways that the industry was involved explicitly, where they've said like, oh, we're doing data mining, we have proprietary data mining tools. It's like, oh, proprietary ones, so we don't even know what you're getting okay.
Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, and I'm just like, oh, you're just bragging about this, of course, because it's about money, and just levels of things where you're like, oh, this is all very interconnected in the way that it's, and the manipulation would go on. But for me, it really feels like, and I mentioned this, that things changed between LiveJournal and then the public, because LiveJournal was kind of a lockdown community. You could have a closed journal, and there were communities that could be closed. So everything would just be within a fandom space. As soon as you get to Twitter and Tumblr, these are public sites. You can't, you can have a protected Twitter account, but you can't have a protected Tumblr account. Everything is completely public, which means every opinion is public. So everyone who gets angry at a certain opinion can find that opinion, and they can get really angry, and the industry can access it. And we found out that there's definitely that they've made accounts and followed people because they brag about it afterwards. They're like, this is how we did it. And it's like, oh, so you intentionally manipulated underage fans, because there's a lot of underage fans as well. And oh, okay, yeah, there's no ethical conundrum whatsoever.
Narcissists always boast. I think that a lot of our distrust in politicians is because the spin doctors started appearing on camera.
Yes.
And our new Labour government under Tony Blair, I think 5 of his spin doctors produced books saying, this is how we fooled you. You're kind of going, okay. So it's very hard to believe people when you know that they're deliberately manipulative. But quite famously with forensic psychologists, when they're dealing with narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, whichever label we want to use, they will get them to boast. They'll get them to, they'll say, oh, it was really clever of you to do this. And they'll confess as part of their boasting. And it's happening throughout the creative industries, that these, if I may use the expression, scumbags are boasting about the awful things they've done to manipulate people. And I think for me, what you're doing becomes very important, because it is an essential aspect of our culture. And it's an aspect that has to change. That if we are ever to become civilized, to save our environment, to have a future, we have to do something about the hedge fund bankers and the people in business who are vampirically sucking the essence out of our culture for their own greed of gain. And so what may seem to an outsider to be, she's just talking about fans, so what? It's actually an essential aspect of how the culture is being manipulated. And so hopefully, you will be able to get more of a public platform for what you're saying. And I must say that I've been completely fascinated by this conversation.
Well, I'm glad. Although it feels like I've barely even gone into, because fandom has its own language as well. There's the Stan language, obviously, Stan, which is the identity that people claim when they're really dedicated. There's BNFs, which are big name fans. Those are the fans that have accomplished fame in their own right, and those are the ones that often steer the conversation.
The 1%.
Yes, exactly. And it's very, and there's shipping. So there's ship wars.
What's that?
Ship. So ship is short for relationship.
Okay.
So a ship is a couple, whether a real one or one that you would like to happen and that you feel strongly about. So for example, Mulder and Scully, or if we're looking at the Star Trek days, the big ship back then was Kirk Spock. So then you'll have ship wars. If it's a TV show, then it's a constant ongoing drama, right? And they're just fighting every episode, like, yes, it's canon now. And it's like, no, it's not canon. And what's going to happen? And you can see the way that it's so funny, because I've just come to realize over the past maybe 5 years just how manipulated and constructed all of it is. Because in going from LiveJournal, you're like, this is all just authentic. Everyone's thoughts and everything is just reflected. But if you look at something like Supernatural, where there was a lot of fans that felt very strongly about certain ships, and then there was fights about ships, and then the fans also hated all the female characters, but not necessarily with female characters. They would just throw them in. It would be like, I don't know, she's a love interest. No, wait. Yeah, no, she's a love interest. Does she have any interest? No, she's not. She doesn't do anything. Whatever. People got annoyed. And then the way I don't ever want to spoil the end of Supernatural, but I saw that there was a lot of just watching fan reactions is sometimes very interesting. They made this canon, but then it was like, oh, we'll give you this line because we know you want it, but also we really don't want to make this happen, so we're just going to give you this line, and then we kill him. Now and then they're like, no, they're not happy. They know what you did. I'm trying to think. It's interesting to watch. If you look at oh, so Twilight was famous for this, obviously. There's Edward Bella, and then there was Jacob Bella, where it's like, and then you have the two factions of fans fighting against each other about which one is the right one, which one is the correct one, which one is the actually good one.
Mm.
Is there an answer for that? No.
Hopefully not.
It's fictional, and it depends on how, you perceive it and what it means to you, but it becomes a real thing that has to be one. One of the ships has to be declared the real one. And then, yeah, there's just constant fighting. And Twilight was an interesting fandom as well that I was not part of, but I knew people who were. And then I've sort of watched from the outside. They're a very good example of what this insistence of believing what you want. Because back in the day, so Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart were dating or whatever you want to, like, they were dating. It was used for PR for Twilight. And there were the fans who were like, oh my God, I love this. It's Bella and Edward in real life. They're together. This is like the real thing. Oh my God, romance, live vicariously. But then there were other fans that were looking at this thing like, nah, they're not actually dating. I think she's gay. Yeah, no, they're not together. No. And then you have these people fighting against each other. And eventually Robert and Kristen broke up, contract ended, however you want to see it. And I'm sure a lot of fans of Robert and Kristen, what did they call each other? Robstan? Yeah, Robstan is the word, the fan name, Robstans. I'm sure a lot of them were devastated and probably just left, but the people that stayed still believe they're together. Even now, she has come out, she's dating women, but no, they're still together. They actually have, I think, 3 children. They're married. This has all been happening behind the scenes, according to them. And it's like, and I know people will laugh because they're like, oh, these crazy fandom conspiracy theories. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, it is a conspiracy, but somehow they're managing to convince themselves of this. And there has to be, whether that's feedback from other fans, and just the selective way that you're parsing information. It's just an interesting way to see. And then you see the shift as well, because now, at first they were the ones in power because this was reality. And now they're the ones that are the mocked group. And you see this in a bunch of different fandoms. There's that for X-Files as well. There's people who, which I didn't even know, but there's people who think David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson are dating now. I don't know. But
we're back to Charles Dickens, actually. She's doing Charles Dickens things for the BBC now. And that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
You don't have to pack material in. We can come back and talk again. Mm-hmm. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by what you're saying. There's a strange and appalling resonance with the Nexium cult that I've sort of setting about writing something about them. I've read Sarah Edmondson's excellent book, Scarred. She was a 12-year member, but she's an actress, and a lot of their focus was on getting celebrities, who'd been in Smallville or was it Battlestar Galactica?
Battlestar Galactica, yeah, and Supernatural. If there had been more women on that show, because that also filmed in Vancouver, those women would probably have been brought in as well.
Yeah,
but they seem to focus on the women, so Supernatural was safe.
Well, I mean, Keith Raniere was, quite evident. He's now serving 120 years in prison, which personally I think is much too short a sentence for what he did. And they should keep him alive for at least 300 years, make him suffer.
Science will develop specifically to keep immoral people alive.
Yeah, it's a good idea. But also the Seduced and the Vow about, you get into the workings of this, of what becomes a sort of celebrity cult, this idea that Keith Raniere is some kind of superhuman being. He's a concert pianist, and we kind of see him playing this very poor version of a little bit of Beethoven. I think it's Für Elise by Beethoven, which he can almost manage to play. And how that fervor is then pushed into him, and how this group of women then allow themselves to have a soldering iron applied to them for 20 to 40 minutes on the mons pubis to carve his initials onto them. And it seems an acceleration and an amplification of the fandom process.
You are reminding me that in the fandom I was in, there were people that got tattoos, like to sort of, indicate their allegiance. Yes, which is not at all, it's nothing. And that's the thing too, is like I've been consuming a lot of destructive cult content, and I'm always like, this is awful, and I'm like, this is nothing compared. Like I was just involved with online stuff, so it's nothing, not even remotely the same thing. But I do keep recognizing things. I'm like, oh, okay, wow. So when people were deciding that we should all be getting V tattoos, that was part of that was maybe not a great plan. That was maybe something darker. And a lot of that. And I think what really made me realize that there was something wrong in my fandom, which was not just, because even when I was kicked out, I still was like, but guys, can I come back? Like, can I apologize to someone? Can I clear this up? Like, I tried to be the person to be like, hello, yes, I know people are saying that I said this and that, which I didn't. I don't know where this came from, but also like, can we, is it okay if we talk? And they'd be like, go F yourself. Like, oh yeah, there was a lot of very strong language. And I was just like, oh, I guess they don't want to talk. And I just had a really big difficulty understanding that unwillingness until I started looking into more of the group psychology of like, oh no, this is, they're never going to change their minds. To them, I'm, fully evil. I've done all of these evil things. I still get messages every now and then now, like 4 years later, where it's just like, it's very strange. But what made me realize that it was super toxic was the illegal activities that were being, promoted, excused. A lot of online cyber stalking, and I remember, I don't know if this is something Mike Render mentioned, I don't know on what podcast, but I think he said something about like, oh, how are they tracking all these flights? He's like, well, as long as you have access to a flight center, you can just do things. I'm like, oh, that's how they did it. Okay. And I also knew that they had access to frequent flyer numbers. So they would track people's flights, and but they wouldn't say it outright. They wouldn't say like, I've tracked a flight and they're going there. It'd be like, I just have a feeling that someone is going to pop up. I think they're going to California. Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Or if there was like a rumor about something happening and people were like, well, we don't believe it because we haven't seen photos yet, right? Pixar didn't happen. But then you have these groups of people who are the people who are in the know somehow, like, no, I think it's happening. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you my sources. No, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't share, but I think we should believe that this is happening. It's like, yeah, probably because you know that they boarded a flight going to this destination. And then I've seen it called out, and these people will be like, listen, I'm just trying to help you guys. I can't believe you're mad at me. Like, we're doing this for you. If I want to share information to help, why are you coming at me? And it's like, no, but this is stalking and it's illegal. And you complain about when others do it, but you're doing it for the right reason, is their logic. And as long as it's done for the right reason, because there's IRS hacks. Like I know there was like tax declarations that were hacked into. There was airport security, emails hacked. Like there's just like, yeah. And then you see the person who targeted me in particular seems to have been a big proponent of a lot of these things, because I got she would call places and try to be like, oh hey, so I heard that, is there any information about, and just would get all of this information, and it's like, that's not okay. What? But they really wanted it so that they can control the discussion, and then they would come up with things to not discuss, because it's like, let's not talk about these things. So they would have secret groups and like, this we don't talk about, and steering the discussions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Rinder, of course, famously, for anybody who's not aware of him, ran harassment for Scientology for 20 years, and I was, for many years, one of the people on his list.
Target, yeah.
And all of the things that you talk about are things that I've experienced. You know, them when I'd arrive at an airport, they'd be there waiting for me. I'd have gun-carrying PIs following me around if I was in the US. And a common trick is it's called a noisy investigation. If you want to discredit somebody, you get a list of everybody they know, everybody you can find out, you know, their doctor, their dentist, their friends, their relatives, and you go to all of them and say, we're doing a criminal investigation into this person, and we've already found out some really interesting things. And I had a situation where my former mother-in-law and members of her family quite readily offered all sorts of information, which was thankfully all of it wrong. You know, they suggested that I'd committed a rape, I'd attempted a murder, I'd been a heroin addict, you know, all sorts of stuff, which was then, you know, bandied out about me. I don't think Mike was personally involved in that, but it is the kind of thing that he was doing for many years. And it showed just how easy it is to get information. I mean, I've had situations where frequently with professionals, with lawyers, with therapists, where because they're not mentioning the name of the person, they'll think it's all right to talk about details of the case. And I had a particular situation where a lawyer was talking to a friend of mine and said that she'd had this woman come in and say that the police were moving the furniture in her house. And it just so happened that my friend knew this story and was able to name the woman. And at that point, confidentiality has been breached. But if lawyers are willing to talk, you know, to boast about their funny cases, you can get just about any information you want from people. And it's not good, and it should not happen.
It's scary. What I found scarier was the seeming cooperation from the people in charge, because it's the 1%, right, that you want to target. And if the 1% is kind of stalkery, you're like, well, they'll relay the information. Like, there is no way, in my head, there is absolutely no way that these people did not know that their flights were being tracked. Like, there's absolutely no way in my head, because they're watching the fandom. So if they know that over, 7 years, certain people somehow always know where you are and seem to have the exact information, like, that this information is leaking, but they might leave it because they're like, that's fine. Why don't you keep this leak? And when we're okay with you knowing, we'll use that. And otherwise we'll just flight private. We'll, use, what was that? I just started thinking of Lou Pearlman, the infamous Svengali from Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, who had his airplane empire. I was thinking, like, yeah, you just rent a plane from a Svengali and just fly around on your own. So I'm like, they know about this. And then just the way that early on, I remember there was like one of the managers had a birthday party, and we knew about it because it was announced. It was actually publicly announced. But then you saw, like, afterwards, like, oh, he's just hanging outside with these 3 girls. And it's like, wait, I recognize these girls. These are girls that have been stalking the man forever. And he's just hanging out with them, like, oh, thanks for coming. And I'm like, oh, so there's some sort of cooperation. Oh, so maybe we shouldn't be upset that they're. And it's easy, just in case people are confused as to how you can know which fans stalk celebrities. It becomes really easy when you see them pop up in photos over and over and over and over again, because they're always sharing them. They're like, oh my God, just ran into Peter at Starbucks. Oh my God, so lucky again. I'm in a different country and I also ran into Peter. Oh, I'm in London now and I also ran into Peter. And it's like, oh, it's funny. You're just magically on every continent that they're in, and you magically find them. Very organic.
Very organic.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying about them, sort of not revealing their sources, but having a feeling about something. That's very much what Robert J. Lifton calls mystical manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, the Indian guru Sai Baba, who influenced the Indian government.
Mm-hmm.
A Japanese film crew caught him out that when you knelt in front of him, you'd feel this frisson of energy. And they found the wires that were connected to the kneeler, So you were getting a little shock to, oh, wow, he's incredible. This way of manipulating people into believing that there's something supernatural or spiritual going on.
Yeah, I mean, when people suddenly, when what they're predicting turns out to be right, and it's like these other cults where it's like you have to find out what information they've given you is correct and actually useful. So there was a lot of really interesting, useful information about the way the press works and the way that news drops can work sometimes. And about how sometimes they'll try to aim for a certain time because this is the time that hits, people are off work, but here they're getting up. So they'll all see, the world will see the same news at the same time. It's like, of course, it's you have to calculate like that when you're in a $1 billion industry and you're trying to promote your clients. So you're like, you learn all of this information, and then they have all these sources, and they know for sure that I can't say my source, but I 100% believe in this, and I know for sure that it's true. And you're like, okay, well, they've been right about a lot of other things. Yeah, but they got all that information illegally. And the reason they believe in something is actually because they were lied to by someone who so you have all of these incredibly strong beliefs that are, they can't be shaken by evidence or by anything, because it's just like, no, it's, I believe it. And I know that feeling because I also was, that feeling of knowing. Yeah. And I think part of what Yuval talks about fervor and awe, and fervor is such a relevant part to fandom because it's part of the marketing for artists, for actors. Like you see it. I'm going to try to think of a recent example. Oh, so for example, Jodie Comer, who is in Killing Eve, who
wonderful Killing Eve.
Who's been doing lots of really great stuff in the UK for a really long time. I've seen her in other shows, but this is a big show that's breaking America. And then you're like, okay, so now clearly she has her people doing the quick work behind the scenes. Okay, get her into magazines, get her tapped, get her here, have her everywhere, so that you're hit with the new thing, and you're like the interest continues to build. And you can see that with artists when they do like, I actually saw this right now because Taylor Swift is doing it, where she's dropping albums out of nowhere, and people are just like, oh my god, and they're just panicking in a positive way, because they're like, it's coming, and they're like, oh, she keeps dropping all these things. So that means, and this is something I did, you have to be awake a lot, so you end up sleep deprived by your own choice, because you don't want to miss anything. Like, oh my god, like I would wake up 3 times a night and be like, did I miss something? I have to check if I missed something. And sometimes you did. Not that it matters ultimately, nothing would have changed if you just woke up in the morning, but there is this urgency of like, I have to be in the know with everyone else. And there would be group chats and stuff like that, like emergency chats, just to alert people. So there's all these systems in place that emphasize how important it is to be like up to date. It doesn't actually matter. Like if you miss 3 press cycles, the story probably has changed by the next press cycle.
And it has become a problem. It's been noted in the UK that a lot of kids are now sleep deprived because they leave their phones on for notifications through the night.
Yeah.
And it perhaps isn't fully understood just how necessary deep sleep is to health, to being awake and aware, and how much more easily one can be manipulated when one has not had enough sleep. It's the Guantanamo Bay, I'm afraid, is
Yeah.
one of the examples of this, where they very deliberately, while they were torturing the 779 people who've been detained there, 5 of whom have been convicted successfully of a crime, but waking them up every hour, one of the torturers said it's the royal route to confession. Sadly, of course, none of the confessions proved to be useful in any way. But if you want to get people to confess things, keep waking them up. If you want to get them in the state of confusion where they are more malleable, more controllable, deprive them of sleep. And when that becomes a natural and voluntary thing, as it did in your case, then we really aren't headed in the right direction.
No.
And as you say, the fact that Taylor Swift is wearing green shoes and not red shoes may not be significant to the future of the world.
No. But it is, she's a real, I find her so fascinating to observe in a business sense, because in part because of fans, and she is on Tumblr. She has her own Tumblr, and she will sometimes interact with fans, which is a great way of elevating status for certain fans who now come closer and they become a bigger deal, and also confirming narratives, right? If this person says this and this is the one that gets responded to, this is what we all have to believe. And anyone who doesn't believe this is actually like, what are you doing? Also, do you secretly hate her? Like, what's wrong with you? So she is fascinating in that sense. And the way that, like I sent that article about how her fans were attacking people who weren't giving the right reviews because somehow it affects, it ultimately doesn't even really affect Taylor Swift if one review doesn't like her album, but it's seen as, a protective measure, like, how dare you do this to her? And there it is again, the thing with the Yuval that he mentioned, the parent-child relationship and the child-to-parent relationship is very present in fandom. I know the press is always talking about, or almost always talking about, how the crazy fans are all, sexually frustrated girls. But there's a lot of, especially the fandom I was in, had a lot of lesbians. And this was like men that they were fans of. And there's no sexual drive, but there is that, like, oh my God, my dad, oh my child. Like, you would refer to them as parent or child, depending on the situation, because you would be filled with this pride. Like, I'm so proud of you, like a parent would be, or, oh my God, I feel like you're taking care of me. Thank you. And that's definitely a common language that's used. There's like a meme line that's like, thank you, fill in the blank, for my life. So it's like, thank you, Taylor, for my life. Or thank you, Justin Bieber, for my life. Like, it would just be that. And I think in the beginning, you're like, yeah, people are just exaggerating. But the more that exaggerated language is used, the more it becomes real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, there was some work on obsessive compulsive disorder a couple of years ago, and they're saying somebody washes their hands 120 times a day. They're saying it was to keep my hands clean. And, it's because of all the bugs out there. But they found out that the behavior precedes the justification. It's not that somebody is afraid of dirt and washes their hands. They start washing their hands and then say, this must be why I'm washing my hands. And so with any behavior, and it's perhaps, when it does work, why cognitive behavioral therapy works, that you establish a new behavior. And if you establish a belief that you are dependent upon this, so, let's say, just a hypothesis, you're an Aztec, and somebody says, if you don't rip a heart out today, then the sun won't rise tomorrow. Are you going to take the risk? Huitzilopochtli is going to be annoyed with you, and that's the end of the world. So, heck, you've got to do it. So behaviors become conditioned by some sense of necessity, by the attachment, the connection, which Yuval and others talk about, that we become dependent upon something happening. If this doesn't happen, then something terrible will occur. And I think it's normal behavior, and I hope that it's a behavior that we can all grow out of. But my estimation of human society, there's a whole model of therapy, the dynamic maturational model put forward by Patricia Crittenden in a great book called Raising Parents, where she suggests that rather than defining somebody as mentally ill and working from there and trying to sort out what their disorder is, you look at firstly their maturity. You say, have they grown up? Have they become responsible for themselves? Have they, become their own parent is one way of looking at it, so that they can control their own behavior, determine good information sources, be aware of their own thinking process, and be autonomous emotionally, so that their emotions are not being thrown around by an abusive partner or a cult group or in a fandom situation. And I would estimate, I don't think 80-20 works there either. I don't think that, well, maybe it does. Maybe about 20% of people do grow up by the time they finish their lives. But the whole advertising industry, the whole PR industry is meant to keep you in adolescence, somewhere around 13, 14 years old. And it works.
Yeah, because people do not want to think that they're being affected. People do not want to think that they're very vehement about it. And it's like, okay, well, I guess there's no convincing you, but here's the information for anyone else who might see it and think, oh, wait. Yeah. Because I can look back and see like, oh yes, I base these beliefs on fandom beliefs that were perpetuated and angled in a certain way. And you notice this too, because there's another big thing with fandom is the update accounts, which are essentially, can I just call them like it's like an online newspaper for just this particular subject, right? So a Justin Bieber update account might be like, he just grabbed Starbucks this morning. Oh, now he's at the airport, and oh, this and that, like just very, very specific things. And but it gets used by the teams as well, because then you start seeing like there's fashion ID, right? So, oh, Justin was grabbing a coffee. Okay, follow up. He was wearing this particular hat, this particular thing, this particular that. Oh yes, and then you see it again later. And you're like, oh wait, oh so it's because he's in a deal with them. Oh, I understand now. But that's not what the fans are perceiving. Like, why wouldn't he just authentically be wearing this? Like, I also want to own that. That's a cool brand. So it just builds.
Yeah, the product placement. I mean, there's an interesting analog which I hadn't even thought about, which is the British royal family.
Oh yeah.
That reports upon the Queen going back to the 1950s, what she's wearing and who designed it. But you also get by royal appointment that there are certain brands have the royal seal of approval. It used to amuse me that various cigarettes would, this is the cigarette smoked by Queen Wilhelmina of Holland. This is the cigarette that is killing Queen Elizabeth II. They're not so popular anymore. But I guess it transfers out. It's very much the same sort of thing that rather than, and again, there's that sense of some kind of charismatic specialness. And let's look at, charisma is the idea of having a supernatural power originally, charism. And when a monarch is crowned, certainly in this country anyway, they're anointed with oil, which is called charism. And this is the church giving them the spiritual power. So it's these things which were taken to be real. This is a real idea that we now, being a bit more grown up, a bit more sophisticated, look upon as being metaphorical. But in any fan situation, the metaphor becomes real again. And you mentioned feelings of knowing, which is an essential idea, the certainty that William James, a psychologist more than 100 years ago, called noesis, which Yuval and I are both quite fascinated by, that the sense, I know this is true. I know this is happening. Yeah. And the one thing that I ask people to do is to separate out what they know from evidence and what they know from belief. Yeah. Because an awful lot of what we know is what we would like to think is true, the feeling of knowing rather than actually knowing. And that's it. We all do it. We all inevitably do it. We, when Yuval first met me in 2015, he walked up to me at a conference I was doing in Toronto, and he was in awe of me. It was wonderful. This great big 6'6" guy who said, "Oh, for 20 years I've been reading your work," and it was like, okay, I'm just a guy who studied something. Sadly, I haven't achieved any of the supernatural powers I was meant to achieve in Scientology. But
did anyone?
No, nobody did yet. But it could happen. It's only been 70 years.
Oh, so, yeah. Maybe you need 300 years. Like maybe we need this medical, life extension, and then
I was talking with a guy the other week, and he's after 10 years, he's completely disillusioned with Scientology, and he says it doesn't work. It doesn't produce supernatural powers. It doesn't produce the clear, where you have perfect memory and can't catch colds and are emotionally completely balanced. It doesn't produce any of the things it claims. And then he said, but I still want to do more of it. How do you break through that? How do you get through that?
Yeah.
And then I put it to him that maybe it does harm. Maybe it doesn't do, maybe not benefit. And that might be worth looking at, that it actually produces people who are less compassionate, more narcissistic, less social. If you just go pro-social and anti-social, it makes people who are, greedy and grasping to get the money to give to David Miscavige so that he can live in luxury.
Yeah.
Which is, maybe that's a good aim, that psychopaths should be allowed a luxurious lifestyle. I don't think so.
I feel like a lot of them do get themselves there, but whether it's deserved, no, I would say no.
No, and we do live in a culture that, it's said that 90% of the people who have wealth in the UK, 100 years ago, their family had wealth. So there's only been a movement of about 10%. If you wind back, then that money, that wealth came from the sugar trade, which in turn came from the slave trade. And so we have a society where the descendants of slavers have the power. And then you add to that people who have scammed and conned their way, without mentioning Bill Gates or Steve Jobs at all, into positions of tremendous power and influence, which in a democracy should not be possible. And we have governments that are having to kowtow to the plutocrats who, and again, I'm not a Marxist, I'm really not. That's just as bad. The idea of state control of everything is dreadful. But we found ourselves in what is called a cacocracy, which is a great word because you can spell it with 2 Ks or 2 Cs. It's one of those, meaning the rule of the worst, meaning, we've got Duterte, Bolsonaro, Scott Morrison, all of these Abe, Modi, Putin, Xi, Boris Johnson, all these wonderful people, rather than having a society which is ruled by people who care about other people who will do what is best for the long-term future of humanity. It's all, let's borrow some money from our great-great-grandchildren to give to the bankers so that they can, these are terrible, bad ideas, but it's all powered by fandom. It's all powered by belief and by maintaining belief. And then it gets more complicated because then you have the conspiracy theories that are thrown into that, and the deep state and all of this stuff, which has pretty much the same propaganda machine behind it because of what's his name, Volkov, the advisor to Putin, who invented this system of you put money into both sides of the fight and let them fight, and let it all go crazy. But anyway, I think we should wind up, and I'll be very, very happy to talk to you again.
Sure.
I'm John Atack, this is Monia, and we thank you for your time.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.